Here being safe number 1 in the deposition of Tina Cafeo, DNP, RN, CENP, in the matter of Cynthia Allen et al. Versus Alan Burks, MD et al. In the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. Case number 24C15003-384MM. Today's date is August 16th, 2016. The time is 11:02 a.m. Video operator today is Brian Mackey. This deposition is taking place at the University of Maryland Medical Center, 22 South Green Street, Baltimore, Maryland. Counsel, please identify themselves and state who they represent.
Rodney M. Gaston, I represent Cynthia Allen, the estate of Dennis Allen, and Dennis Allen's surviving children.
Good morning, Ronald Shaw. I represent Dr. Alan Burks and the University of Maryland Medical System.
Court reporter today is Sherry Smith. Will the reporter please swear in the witness?
Okay, raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ma'am, could you please state your name and business address?
Christina Cafeo, and my business address is 22 South Green Street, Baltimore, Maryland.
All right, Ms. Cafeo, have you had your deposition taken before?
No.
Okay. I just want to go over some of the ground rules so we can get an accurate record. The court reporter is here to take down my questions and your answers. She can't take down both of us talking at the same time, so I'll simply ask if you can wait until I finish asking my question before you answer, and then I'll try not to interrupt your answer and wait for you to answer before I ask my next question. If at any time you don't understand a question that I ask you, stop me immediately and tell me I don't understand, and I'll try to rephrase the question. Otherwise, if you don't, we'll assume that you've understood the answer, and the answer that you gave is the answer that you intended to give. Also, if at any time you need to take a break, just let us know. Okay? All right. Ma'am, I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 3. Can you tell me if that is is that your current CV?
That is as of June.
As of June?
Yes.
Okay. Has anything substantially changed as
No.
of June? All right, thank you. All right. Ma'am, I'm going to also show you and your attorney exhibit number 1. The reason you're here is pursuant to a notice of deposition that I filed in this case for University of Maryland Medical System to identify a corporate representative to address certain topics and to produce certain documents. The topics and documents are listed in Exhibit 1, and you, with the assistance of your attorney, if you don't mind, can you tell me which topics you're here to address? That way, I won't waste your time by asking you questions on topics that you're not here to address.
So on behalf of the corporation, Ms. Cafeo will address a portion of paragraph 4 under Roman numeral 1, the last sentence concerning policies, procedures, protocols, or guidelines concerning obtaining informed consent from a patient to whom the physician has recommended K-Exalate. Ms. Cafeo will also address paragraph 19 under Roman numeral 1 concerning stat or urgent requests for hemodialysis. She will also address number 21, paragraph number 21 under Roman numeral 1, explaining nephrology service, providing a requesting physician with an estimated time period. And she will also address paragraph 34 under Roman numeral 1, explaining how the cardiac monitor system is utilized. And then Roman numeral 2, paragraphs 10, 11, and 13.
What about 21, Counselor? the last paragraph of documents.
21 in?
Yeah, Roman numeral 2. I'm sorry, Roman numeral 3, number 21.
Right, she'll answer that. There
Okay.
are no documents.
Thank you.
But she'll answer that.
Okay. Ms. Cafeo, I have your curriculum vitae, and the incident we're in court today concerns the treatment Mr. Allen received in March of 2013. I understand that you were employed at University of Maryland Medical Center from 2009 through today's date. Is that correct?
Correct.
Has your position as of March 2013, has it changed in any way from March 2013 to today's date?
Yes. I'm trying to think of the date I was promoted, but I think I was promoted about a year ago. It's on there.
It looks like
I went from
2015, is that when you became Vice President of Patient Care Services?
From
Okay.
Director of Nursing, yes.
All right. And how is that, how is your position, I'm sorry, and how is that position different from what you had in 2013?
So my span of control has increased. So becoming Associate Chief Nursing Officer, I now have the Director for Oncology and the Director for Women's and Children's reporting up through me.
Okay.
As well as my past duties.
All right. And your duties as of March of 2013, could you explain them generally?
Oversaw the areas in the hospital, the units, medicine, surgery, and cardiac services.
When you mean oversaw the services, would that be the nursing services associated with those 3 branches or
Yes.
divisions of the hospital? Okay. All right. And when is the last time that you performed hands-on clinical care of a patient as a nurse?
I have not provided hands-on care at this hospital.
Okay. And did your duties in 2013 include the review of any policies or procedures that we requested in this case? That would be actually requested in this case.
Have I reviewed informed consent policy?
Okay.
I've looked at that.
Did you have any role in implementing the informed consent policy?
No.
Okay. Did you have any, there's one policy that we've asked for that has to do with nurses addressing verbal orders of physicians that have not been provided yet. And I'm wondering if you were aware of any such policy that exists regarding nurses receiving verbal orders from physicians.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have the document, so if you can tell me from, number one, does it exist?
What I'm trying to remember is if it's a policy or a guideline. But yes, nurses, we have, I believe, we have a policy that states that nurses can get verbal orders, and they must be co-signed by a physician.
Okay, and is there a difference between a policy and a guideline? If you can explain the difference.
A policy is written in our manual that we follow. Guidelines give guidelines aren't useful in that guidelines give nurses parameters of which to practice, but they always rely on written policies or protocols. So any procedure or anything we have is based on the policy or protocol.
All right, and where Are the guidelines written down and kept somewhere in the manual as well?
Guidelines, are you talking about specific or in general?
No, just nursing in her field, nursing.
So,
Yeah, it's-
first of all, she was not identified to address that particular issue. I mean, I'll let her go into it, but I'm not sure how knowledgeable she is on the issue of accepting verbal orders from a physician. She's not been identified on that. But to the extent that she has some information that you want to try to explore, I'll permit her to go forward.
Okay, let's just, we were talking about the difference between policies that are written policies in the manual and guidelines. Are guidelines also written down somewhere?
So I would prefer not to answer that because I think that in some instances they're unit-based guidelines to help guide practices based on policies and procedures. So basically you fall back on written policies and procedures when you practice.
All right, well, I'm still trying to figure out, do these guidelines
I might be
for
conf-
nursing care, do they exist or not?
I can't answer that.
All right, and you are the Associate Chief Nursing Officer, correct?
Correct.
And you're unaware whether there are guidelines separate and apart from policies that deal with nursing care in the hospital?
She hasn't, I object, she hasn't been asked to address that issue. I'm not even sure if that was a request on the corporate designee, but I'll permit her to answer to the extent that she has knowledge. She may not be fully prepared for that because she hasn't been identified to address that issue.
Well,
The question you're asking if there's written guidelines, and I can't answer that to the extent you're asking it.
okay. Let's talk about your knowledge of the nurses' policies and procedures that apply to receiving verbal orders from physicians.
Well, again, I object, she hasn't been asked to address that issue. She was identified the paragraphs to which she would respond, and that was not one of
Elizabeth,
those.
you have a call on line 1. Elizabeth, line 1.
But to the extent that she has some knowledge, I'll let her answer it, but she may not be as fully prepared as she would otherwise have been had she been identified to respond to that particular issue.
Ma'am, answer to the best that you can.
So can you repeat the question?
Right. The question was, can you tell me what your understanding is of the policies that apply to nurses when they receive a verbal order for medicine for a patient from a physician?
So the nurse must document the verbal order. If they read back and verify understanding of that order.
Okay.
And then it must be co-signed by the provider.
Anything else?
That's the verbal order.
Okay. All right. I just need to know if you were done answering the question. Okay. All right. Now, your attorney said you were here to address topic number 4 with respect to informed consent on how a physician can or should obtain informed consent from a patient to whom the physician has recommended KX-LATE. Okay. Can you tell me what your answer to that question is?
So we do not...
There's a policy that we produced entitled Informed Consent Requirements. It's 4 pages, policy PROE 101. That would apply to that topic.
In this policy, it guides providers on area or terms that they should get informed consent, and KX-late is a normal therapy in the hospital, and we do not get informed consent for that medical therapy.
Where does it say in the policy that you're referring to that KX-late is normal therapy in the hospital?
It's a medication that's part of normal treatment
I don't understand
for
what you...
high potassium. So that would be ordered like other medication orders for treatment of patients in the hospital with certain ailments.
I don't understand the distinction. If a medication is part of a normal treatment for an ailment that a patient has in the hospital, the doctors do not have to follow the informed consent policies and procedures.
Objection.
It's-
As to form, you can answer. You can go ahead and answer.
So if it's a highly toxic drug, in the informed consent policy, it says that you should get informed consent.
Well, what I'm trying to figure out is you've characterized KX-late as part of normal treatment. And then your testimony is because it's part of a normal treatment for a patient here, the doctors do not have to comply with these written policies regarding informed consent. Can you tell me where in that policy does it say that the doctors are not required to follow this policy for normal treatment of patients?
Okay, object as to form and foundation, but you can answer. He's asking where in the policy.
KX-late's to treat high potassium. That's a normal therapy regime. In the policy, it says that you get informed consent if a highly toxic drug is administered, i.e. chemotherapy. The criteria, it says the criteria used to indicate the need for informed consent.
Okay, which maybe you're
And
reading
that
from a different
is-
policy. Can you tell me what the policy number is at the top that you're reading from?
Policy number PROE-101.
Okay, and I have that in front of me. What page are you referring to?
Page 2 of 4,
Page 4.
number 3. The following criteria should be used to indicate the need for informed consent.
Okay. Page 4, paragraph 3.
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure that, what, on the back of that policy where it says review and revised, can you tell me what, on the very end, on the last page, it should, mine says reviewed hyphen revised. Does yours say that? Okay, can you read to me those dates and words so I'll be sure that I have the same policy that you're looking at, if you don't mind?
Do you just want the last reviewed in March of 2013?
Just the whole thing, so I'm sure we're on the same thing.
June of 2004, October of 1995, December of 1998, November of 2001, October of 2006, April of 2006, April of 2009, October of 2009, November 2011, and it says PROE 113 deleted, incorporated in PROE 101, 3/2013.
Okay, all right, so I'm,
Sorry.
Okay, and that sentence you were reading from, you say it's on 1, 2, 3, it's on the 4th page?
Second page.
Sorry, 2nd page?
Second page.
And is it under letter B?
Second page, number 3.
Number 3. Okay. And does that read, the following criteria should be used to indicate the need for informed consent?
Correct.
Okay. So your testimony is because Kayexlate is not a highly toxic drug, that the doctors are excluded from obtaining informed consent from a patient before the doctor administers Kayexlate to that patient?
Correct.
Okay. So if you follow the procedures here, then any drug that's not highly toxic, then a doctor never has to obtain informed consent for a patient in this hospital before the doctor recommends and administers the drug to that patient?
Objection is to form. You can answer.
Informed consent policy is set up to guide physicians on informed consent. How I read this is if a patient, if the drug is highly toxic, the physician does not need to get, unless the drug is highly toxic, the physician does not need to get informed consent.
Okay, so my question again is, for every drug that's not a highly toxic drug, when a doctor at University of Maryland Hospital wants to administer the drug to the patient, the doctor does not have to obtain the patient's informed consent. Is that your testimony?
Objection asked and answered. Go ahead. One more time.
The physician makes the determination of informed consent. How I read this policy is unless the drug is highly toxic, they do not need to obtain informed consent.
All right. And does the definition of highly toxic appear in this informed consent policy?
I do not believe so.
Okay. Do you know what definitions doctors in this hospital are using for the word highly toxic drug as it pertains to this informed consent policy?
No, I couldn't verbalize the exact definition they use.
Is there anywhere in any written procedure or policy in the hospital that defines a highly toxic drug for the purposes of this informed consent policy and procedure?
Please repeat the last question.
Right. Is there any written documents, policies, procedure, guidelines that define, quote, a highly toxic drug?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Now, is a drug, in your opinion, that can cause bowel perforation a highly toxic drug?
Objection. I'm instructing her not to answer that question.
Ma'am, you just gave an opinion that K-Exolate is not one of the drugs that physicians in this hospital have to obtain informed consent before administering, correct?
Correct.
And then you'd have to conclude that K-Exolate is not a highly toxic drug. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. How come K-Exolate, in your opinion, is not a highly toxic drug?
Because it's the long-term treatment for a high potassium.
Why does that make that a non-toxic drug?
It's standard care.
Are you going to be addressing standard of care issues?
No.
Okay, then I'm going to go back to my original question. Why did you conclude that K-Exolate was not a highly toxic drug that excludes the physicians from obtaining a patient's informed consent before they administer the drug?
Objection. Asked and answered. You can answer.
The informed consent policy is here to guide the physician on when they need to get informed consent. We do not get informed consent for K-Exolate.
Okay, and the reason you explain that is because you concluded that K-Exolate's not a highly toxic drug, correct?
Per the policy, if it was a highly toxic drug, it would require informed consent.
All right, and you've concluded that it's not a highly toxic drug, correct? That's your opinion?
It's not, we do not get, the physician does not get informed consent when they order that therapy.
Right, and your explanation is that because, and you pointed to a specific policy where it says they're only required to get informed consent for a highly toxic drug.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have that correct?
Correct.
Okay, define toxic drug for me.
I cannot define toxic drug. I can read from the policy.
That's okay. If you can't
If
define
it's-
it, that's all right. That's the answer. All right.
Objection. Move to strike.
Yeah.
So there's another policy that comes with this that we're also going to reference. It's policy number PROE 101A.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yes, you have.
I have, I'm sorry. Please tell me where it is.
I don't know where it is in yours. Here it is.
Well,
That's where it goes stop.
oh, that's the more than one location. Okay, I think I have seen that. Hold on a second. Yes, thank you. Okay. All right,
So
now,
this document lists procedures performed in more than one location for which informed consent is required.
okay, but the policy, ma'am, that your attorney just referenced doesn't have anything to do with the management of hyperkalemia, does it?
I don't see that here. No.
Okay. All right, is there any other policies and procedures that you're going to talk about with respect to informed consent other than the one we've already talked about, which is PROE-101 and PROE-101A?
No, there are no others.
Okay. And ma'am, is it fair to say that these two policies were in effect at the time that Mr. Allen was a patient here at University of Maryland Hospital in March of 2013?
Yes, they were effective and last revised in March of 2013.
Okay. Now, with respect to informed consent, does the doctor have to write in the chart that he obtained informed consent from the patient with respect to those areas of informed consent that he has to obtain informed consent for in accordance with the policies?
The physician puts the informed consent in the patient's medical record.
It has to be in writing.
It's an informed consent form, yes.
Informed consent form. So whenever a doctor is required to obtain informed consent pursuant to the policies that we just talked about, there's a form that the doctor must complete and put in the patient's chart. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. And if a patient, after the doctor completes the informed consent, refuses the medication, is the doctor also supposed to write that refusal on the informed consent form?
I am unsure where they document a refusal of informed consent.
But at least it must be documented in the patient's chart. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay, all right. Did you plan on making any other comments regarding the informed consent policies and procedures other than what you've already testified to?
No.
Okay, all right. Number 19 is a topic area that your lawyer said you were here to talk about. And number 19 asks for the deponent, which would be you. And you can
Wait a
read-
second till we can find that.
Sure.
Here. Right.
To be able to explain in detail how a stat or urgent request for hemodialysis is to be processed by the nephrology service. This includes a detailed explanation of how the request is to be documented by the physician making the request and the person receiving the request, how the nephrology nurses, technicians are supposed to communicate the approximate time frame when the request can be accomplished to the physician making the request, and any and all steps to be taken by the nephrology service to facilitate the request. Now, that's a lot of areas of inquiry, so I'm going to break it down for you so we can do it one at a time. All right. Now, can you explain how a stat or urgent request for hemodialysis is to be processed by the nephrology service?
So requesting dialysis is a consult request that the provider makes to the oncology service. So physician to physician.
Nephrology service. You said oncology.
I'm sorry, nephrology service. I apologize.
It's okay. Go right ahead. All right. Now, and how is a stat or urgent request made?
By provider to provider communication for consult.
Is it verbal? Is it written? Or is it some other form?
I believe it could be either verbal or through the computer, through a written request.
Could it be by the computer system or could it be by facsimile?
I do not know if it could be faxed, but I believe you can order the consult through the medical record.
Okay.
But
and-
I know you can do a phone call.
Okay. And is there a policy or procedure that explains what you just testified to as to how this stat or urgent request can be made?
And when you say policy, are you referring to a written policy?
A written policy procedure, or you mentioned something also about guidelines. So if you can tell me, is there anything written down where we can go to where it says, in order to make a stat or urgent request for hemodialysis, the provider is supposed to do A, B, C, or D? Is there
No.
anything written? Okay.
No.
All right. All right, then how did you become aware of the policy? If it's not written, how were you aware of it?
Physicians can order consult services for different patient needs in the organization. Nephrology is a consult service.
Okay, are you aware of that as your general knowledge as Vice President of Patient Care Services?
Yes, and as a nurse.
As a nurse, okay. All right. Now, And how is the physician supposed to document the request? Means the provider who's ordering it, how are they supposed to document that?
They would document in the medical record.
There must be a written documentation of a request for a stat or urgent dialysis request by a provider. Is that your testimony?
They would document their plan of care and needs. How they document in their documentation, I am unaware of.
Is there any other person in the hospital who would be more aware of how that's done other than you?
A physician. Or
Because
provider.
you're the person who's been elected to answer that question, and it's your testimony that you're not sure how physicians are supposed to document their request for stat or urgent hemodialysis. Is that correct?
Well, that's not correct. She's testified that it's supposed to be documented
In
in
the
the medical
medical
records.
record.
But you don't know how it's to be documented.
So I'm not sure of the area of documentation or where they document in the medical record, but they document in the medical record.
All right. Now, and when the provider makes a request through the nephrology service for stat or urgent hemodialysis, what is the obligation of the nephrology service or person to whom the provider makes
Ortho is on line 2. Ortho, line 2.
I'm going to ask the question again. When a medical provider makes a request for urgent or stat hemodialysis through the nephrology service, can you tell me what steps the person in the nephrology service has to follow when that request comes through?
The consult service contacts the team that the request is being made for. And the providers determine a treatment plan.
Okay. What are you talking about, the consult service?
Nephrology is a consult service, so the patient's physician requests dialysis, puts a request to the nephrologist, who then has that conversation with the physician requesting the dialysis service. The nephrologist and the patient's physician talk about the plan of care
Okay.
and discuss next steps.
Right. That's what I want to know, the next steps. What is the nephrologist service supposed to do, and how do they document the request, and how do they implement the request?
So are you saying if they want dialysis, what's that process? If the physicians agree they're going to have dialysis or need dialysis?
Okay.
Is that what I'm confused.
That's okay, I don't want you to be confused. Where we are in our continuum is, the provider has now reached out to the nephrologist service, requested stat or urgent dialysis. The nephrology service agrees. What's the next step in order to implement that process?
The nephrologist, they would determine time frame, meaning they would determine if it needs to happen today or when they should have this service rendered. And then the nephrologist would work with the dialysis team.
If it's a stat or urgent basis, is there a policy or a procedure in place at the hospital that lets the nephrologist know the time frame when that stat or urgent request has to be complied with or should be complied with?
No.
And then Is the nephrology service that was in place at the time Mr. Allen was a patient at this hospital a contract service?
The nephrologist or
The dialysis?
the dialysis team, the nurses and technicians that provide dialysis care? Is that what you're just
I'm trying to-
asking me?
Okay, okay. Because I saw a contract for dialysis in the documents that was produced.
Right.
And that would be an outside service providing dialysis for patients here at the hospital, correct?
Correct.
Does that outside service consist of nephrologists, or is it simply nurses who are actually performing the dialysis itself?
The dialysis staff. Yes, nurses and technologists that provide dialysis services, or technicians.
All right. Are there policies and procedures in place at the hospital that the nurses and technicians who are performing the actual dialysis must follow when a nephrologist lets them know or tells them that I have a patient that needs that dialysis or urgent dialysis?
No.
Is there a time period when the nurses and technicians for the dialysis service, time period when they are expected to comply and actually perform dialysis when a request for stat or urgent dialysis has been made by a nephrologist?
No.
Is there any policy or procedure in place where the dialysis team, which would be the nurses and technicians, have to notify the provider or the nephrologist who's ordering the dialysis when dialysis on a stat or urgent basis cannot be instituted within 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours of the request?
Objection, you can answer.
The nephrologist works directly with the dialysis staff to triage the request along with all the other requests that are occurring during that day. Timing would depend on the resources being available and the staff being available, meaning the machine being off of, not being available, not on, being used to treat another patient at the time of the request. So timing can vary, but that is a conversation that the nephrologist is having with the dialysis staff to triage what happens when a stat request comes in.
Okay, so under the policies and procedures at the hospital, when the nephrologist contacts a dialysis service and orders a stat or urgent dialysis for a patient, the dialysis service, which would be the nurses and technicians, are supposed to let the nephrologist know the approximate time when they're ordered, when dialysis can be implemented?
Objection, you can answer. I don't think that's her answer. Go ahead.
The nephrologists work to triage and make the schedule based on physician, based on patient needs. So the physician's actually guiding the requests as they come in.
All right, and in this case, we're assuming the request is a stat or urgent basis.
So the
patient-
physician's triaging.
Right. And in our scenario, the physician's already done that. So now the triage is stat or urgent. When the nephrologist tells the dialysis unit, I have a stat or urgent request, is the dialysis unit supposed to then tell the nephrologist the approximate time when they can initiate dialysis in light of that stat or urgent request?
Objection, you can answer.
There's a schedule of dialysis that's occurring at the time of the request. The nephrologist makes the determination of where the new request is going to fit into the schedule.
So the nephrologist, when making the request, gets information from the dialysis unit as to how many other people are on dialysis, what the schedule is, and the nephrologist then decides the priority of the dialysis treatment for his particular patient.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Now, is the nephrologist then supposed to contact the medical provider and say, listen, I've evaluated your request, I evaluated the schedule, here's the approximate time when we're able to do dialysis for your patient? Is that what the nephrologist is supposed to do?
Objection. You can answer.
I believe that I don't believe they give a time frame exactly, but I think if the patient is to have dialysis that day, that's probably what's communicated. And they potentially may give a tentative timeline.
Do you know if any of the hospital policies, rules, and procedures require the nephrologist to contact the medical provider and give them an estimate of the time that they can start dialysis for that provider's patient?
No.
Does the hospital keep any records regarding times that specific requests for dialysis have been made by medical providers and the time when the dialysis unit has been able to start dialysis for that patient?
So can I ask, you mean outside the normal patient records, which would contain that information, you mean is there an independent place that information is stored? That's my request for clarification.
Well, do you understand the question there?
Not really.
Okay. We're talking about an outside firm that's been contacted to perform dialysis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, is there records kept in the hospital, it's available to the hospital, as to the number of patients that this dialysis unit performs dialysis for, to include the time of the initial request and the time dialysis is started?
The time dialysis started is in the documentation by the dialysis staff in the patient's record. The dialysis schedule is a daily schedule.
Let's put the daily schedule aside. And we'll talk about only urgent and stat requests. Okay. Is there written records that the hospital has from the dialysis unit when the time that a doctor makes a request for a stat or urgent dialysis and the time that dialysis is started for that patient?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
All right. Let's go to number... And are there any written, might have asked you this again, I apologize, but are there any written policies, procedures, or guidelines that the dialysis service is supposed to follow when a nephrologist makes a request for dialysis for a patient at the hospital?
They schedule patients for dialysis through the nephrologist. The nephrologist writes the orders for dialysis and puts the patients on a scheduled regime in dialysis. Is that answering your question?
No, ma'am, my question's a little different.
Okay.
Are there written policies, procedures, and guidelines that direct how the dialysis unit is supposed to process requests for dialysis for patients in this hospital? The steps they have to go through, what they have to do, how they're supposed to document it, how they're supposed to implement it, those types of policies and procedures. Are there any of those that exist in this hospital?
So the dialysis staff follows the orders rendered by the physician for dialysis for a particular patient and documents such in the medical record. And
I understand that's what they do, but I want to know if there are any written policies or procedures or guidelines that instruct them that that is how they're supposed to process a request for dialysis.
requests are processed through the nephrologist.
Ma'am, I understand that. I'm asking for if there exists any written policies or procedures and guidelines that the dialysis service has been provided and are supposed to follow when they get a request for dialysis from a nephrologist here at the hospital.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, let's talk about the cardiac monitoring system.
It's paragraph
This is
34.
Paragraph 34. And I'll read the topic area, which is lengthy, and then we'll try to break it down for you. The topic area on number 34 states, the deponent should be able to explain how the cardiac monitor system that was utilized for Dennis Allen on March 18, 2013 functioned, to include how alarms are activated, how the alarms are captured and recorded on any data system within the hospital. The deponent should also be able to explain the procedures and protocols to be followed by the nursing staff when the patient's cardiac alarm goes off frequently and repeatedly during a 3-hour period, to include how this frequency is to be noted in the patient's chart and how and when the attending physician should be notified when this situation occurs. Okay, my first question is, do you know the type of cardiac monitoring system that was used for Mr. Allen in this hospital on March 18, 2013?
We produced documents responsive to that.
I want to know if she knows.
I have to hand them to her.
I want to know if she knows without looking at any records.
Well, no, that's not the way a corporate designee deposition works.
That's the way I'm going to ask the question.
Well, but that's
I
not
want to know
the
if she
way.
has-
The way corporate designee deposition works is not that she has to have personal knowledge before she's anointed as the corporate designee. It's has she learned the knowledge based on educating herself to address these topics, and that's what's happened in this case. So she doesn't have personal knowledge of this information before she was asked to be the corporate designee. So
Then
she's going to have to
I need
refer
her
to
to
documents.
testify to that, not you to answer my question. My question again, ma'am, is simple. Do you have any personal knowledge of the cardiac monitoring system that was used for Dennis Allen while he was in this hospital on March 18, 2013?
And my question is, do you mean who the manufacturer was or just how it worked?
Any personal knowledge?
Objection. You can answer. This is ridiculous, nonsensical, but you can answer.
It's not.
The
Go ahead.
It
patient,
is.
the patient was in the medical intermediate care unit, correct?
Correct.
And that is a bedside hard monitored system.
Bedside?
It's the monitor is connected to the wall and the patient's hooked to it. It's not a portable.
And how were you aware that this is a type of system that was used for Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013?
That's the type of monitoring that's in that particular unit.
Okay, all right. So it's a bedside monitoring system?
Yes.
Okay. And can you explain the components of that system to me? What is it, just what they are?
So there's a monitor on the wall that you can monitor heart rate, blood pressure, whatever a patient needs on that monitor. And there are leads that are hooked to the patient that are fed to the monitor.
All right. And is this does this include cardiac monitoring as well?
Yes.
All right. Now, and how many leads would be hooked to the patient for the consistent monitoring, constant monitoring?
I believe 5.
Is this separate and apart from a 12-lead EKG that's performed on a patient on occasion?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this monitoring system, with the monitor being in the patient's room, can you tell me the type of alarm system that's used for this particular monitor? How the alarms go off?
The alarms go off in the room at the bedside monitor and in the hallway.
Would that be at the nurse's station?
In this unit, yes. Nurse's station, or there's hallway monitors where you could see that an alarm's going off.
Okay, so hang on a second. Do you mean there's actual TV screens in the hallway that displayed the information that's contained on the monitor in the patient's room?
They display the rhythm, that's it. They display the rhythm in the hallway.
Rhythm. Does that display in the hallway also include blood pressure, heart rate, any other systems for that patient? Or is it just the rhythm?
I believe it's just the rhythm, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go up and look.
Okay, all right. Now, with respect to the monitor that's at the nurse's station, does that monitor have all of the physiological systems for that patient? Does that appear on that monitor at the nurse's station?
I apologize. I'm not really sure. All that information is at the bedside, on the bedside monitor. I'm not sure what's fed to the main monitor. I would assume you can...
Don't want you to assume.
Yeah.
I just...
the nurses, the monitors at the nursing station can pull up the information that's in each patient's room.
Okay, the nurse can access all the information that's on the patient's monitor in the room at the nurse's station. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, with respect to the alarms, if an alarm goes off in the patient's room on the monitor, for any system that's monitored at that time, does that also send an alarm to the nurse's station?
Yes.
Okay. Now, these systems that are monitored for Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013, how are they recorded? How's the hospital keep a record of that information?
They're not recorded. They're, you can pull back and look for alarm history in the monitor.
All right, so the continuous monitoring of a patient with respect to rhythm, blood pressure, heart rate is not automatically captured or stored in any computer system in the hospital. Is that correct?
It's stored, you could pull it up in the monitor system for a certain period of time. There's a certain period of time that it's saved in that system.
And for what period of time is that?
I don't know the exact.
The information we
Time
were able to
frame.
obtain was it was 60 days.
And I believe you can look back at history for a patient while the patient's still admitted to the bed for a certain time frame that you could look back at their alarm history.
Now, is the information, do you know if the information has to be manually destroyed from the system or whether it's automatically erased after this particular period of time?
I don't think it's stored anymore. I think it's only a certain time frame of storage of data in this system.
Okay, and if you care to look at one of the written Now, hang on a second. What about alarms?
Hazel, you have a call on line 1. Hazel, line 1.
If an alarm goes off, is that alarm automatically stored in the system?
Yes.
Okay. And if the alarm keeps going off every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, is it fair to say that every time the alarm goes off, that incident of the alarms going off would be stored in the system?
I believe the whole continuous monitoring episode for patients stored over time in the system. You can go back and look at monitor history and see what's occurred.
I'm talking about specific alarms that go off for a patient. Because I saw something where every time an alarm goes off for a particular physiological system, if it's a crisis, it's always stored. And I'm wondering, if the alarm goes off, does it continually go off until the nurse turns it off?
So,
Objection is to form. You can answer.
thank you. Alarm parameters are set to notify the providers of care that they need to address something. So yes, they'll shut the alarm off and address, not shut it off, but silent it to address whatever the alarm may be. So if there's something going on with the patient condition at that time, the medical team's addressing the patient condition that the alarms alerted them to.
Okay. Now, does the doctor silence the alarm, or does the nurse silence the alarm?
Whoever's,
You can answer.
I believe whoever's in addressing the issue may silence the alarm.
Now, that's assuming that the audible alarm is silenced. Does the cardiac monitor, however, still monitor the patient's condition and indicate somewhere on the strip that there is a problem with the patient, the quote alarm?
Objection. You can answer.
They document the patient condition and the treatment plan.
I'm talking about the alarm system itself.
The alarm system is to notify of an issue that requires treatment. The documentation centers around the issue and the treatment plan.
Okay, and does the constant monitoring still, even though the audible alarm sounds, does the machine still monitor the patient and still indicate on the strip that there's an alarm that's continuing for that patient?
I believe
Okay.
it's, yeah, it flashes.
Okay. All right, and I'll show you what's been marked as exhibit number 1.
Let me take a look at it.
And we have exhibit number 1, I think the first page at the bottom is page 123, is that correct?
This is the number.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
123.
Okay. And is this one of the standard strips that can be printed off from the alarm system that was working in Mr. Allen's room during his admission on March of 2013?
I object as to form and terminology. You can answer.
This looks like a rhythm strip pulled from the monitor.
Okay. And can you interpret the information that's contained on that strip for us?
What do you mean? Can she interpret it? Can she read EKG?
I want you to explain where it says saved MIMC manual, saved MIMC 66. I think what's missing is the first word, which would be alarm saved, because that's in the next page. But if you can interpret what that means, what happened at that time.
I'm reading what you are. It looks like it's some saved, medical IMC, manual saved, medical IMC. 66 may be the room. I don't know.
That's what I'm asking, if you can interpret those readings off of this alarm system. All right, can you interpret anything else? I know we have the date there and the time. Can you read what else is there?
Okay, so I object when you say alarm system. I think this is more like a telemetry system as opposed to an alarm system. But I object as to that terminology.
Well, ma'am,
Go ahead and answer.
is this an alarm or not?
I don't know. This is a rhythm strip. I'm not sure what this is. So this is saying that alarm something tells you PVCs, it tells you arrhythmia full, PVC 0, ST segments, monitoring EKG, non-invasive blood pressure.
All right, can you tell whether that strip is from an alarm or not?
I cannot.
All right, let's go to the next page. I think it's 131 on Exhibit 1. The left-hand bottom corner. The words alarm saved, SPO2. Can you read what that is on there? Interpret that for me. Can you tell me if that's an alarm?
Alarm saved SPO2 low, 87.
Does that mean that the SPO2 values were lower than the parameters that was set for this patient and the alarm went off?
That's how I would interpret this.
Okay. And for the one on the right-hand side?
Alarm saved SPO2 low, 87.
Okay. Can you tell from this record how long the patient's SPO2 levels were low?
No.
Okay. Okay, can we go to page 155? The bottom left. Does that indicate another alarm went off for Mr. Allen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that the same SPO2 low?
This one says the same thing. Alarm saved SPO2 low.
Okay. Did it also capture Mr. Allen's heart rate at 79 at that time?
Heart rate 79.
Okay. Can you interpret those letters where it says PR, QSR, and QT that were handwritten on that sheet?
Those are intervals for the EKG.
And PR meaning what?
P wave to R wave interval.
Okay. And the interval being 0.18, is that 0.18 seconds?
I can't-
Again, beyond
I
the
can't
scope of
remember
what she's been
specifics.
requested to do.
Well, if you take a look on the right-hand side where it says PR equals 0.169 seconds, QR equals 0.451 seconds, do you know if that's, do you know what those are? Because it says caliper. Do you know whether that's the setting for those parameters? for this patient?
Objection, beyond the scope. Go ahead.
Well,
I can't, answer about the specific intervals on here.
let's go to page number 179. Left-hand side, you see where it says alarm saved, no breath? Are you on
Yes, I
page
see.
179 at the bottom?
I see this. Mhm.
Okay. Does that mean that the patient did not breathe for a period of time that caused the alarm to sound?
I am unsure.
Why?
So,
Let me object to this whole line of questioning because this is specific to this patient's particular care. You're asking me questions that should have been asked of treating healthcare providers, many of whom you've already deposed. So I'll let her try to answer this question, but I think this is inappropriate. I know it's inappropriate.
No, it's actually exactly what's requested in 34, to explain how the monitoring system that we utilize for him functioned, to include how the alarms are activated, how the alarms are captured, and
But not
recorded
to-
on any data system.
But not to interpret how the alarm functioned for this particular patient. That was something that should have been asked of a treating healthcare provider who either recorded this or was there at the time.
All right. Ma'am, for the alarms that were in place for Mr. Allen, that you're familiar with, you can certainly interpret that strip, can you not?
Object. When you say interpret the strip, I don't know what you mean by that.
Ma'am, do you know what I mean when I ask you to interpret that strip, to tell me what those words mean?
I can read what the strip is saying.
Okay, what does the strip say?
Alarm saved, no breath, medical, MIMC, I don't know what that's that word. Do you want me to try to read all 3 lines?
Now, let's just stop right there where it says alarm saved, no breaths, in accordance with your knowledge of the cardiac monitoring system that was in place for Mr. Allen on this date. What does that phrase mean?
Objection. Beyond the scope. You can answer if you can.
What it's telling me is the monitor was picking up that they could not sense a breath. I would have to look at the patient and I would have to make a clinical judgment looking at the actual patient to make a determination.
Okay. All right. And recording no breath is one of the physiological symptoms that are captured by the alarm system that was in place for Mr. Allen on March 18, 2013, correct?
That's what's on this. Are you asking if that's what's on this strip?
Oh, we already know that's what's on the strip. I'm asking you that for the cardiac monitor system that was in place for Mr. Allen, one of the functions that it records is whether the patient is breathing, correct?
If respirations are pulled up for the monitors, it will read that.
Okay, and on this patient, was respiration is one of the categories that was set for Mr. Allen on this day?
Objection. Beyond scope. You can answer.
I would assume,
That's one of the standard
based on
things.
this rhythm strip.
Right, that's, okay. And respiration is one of the standard things that you monitor for a patient such as Mr. Allen, correct?
Well, objection. That's beyond the scope. How she was asked to address what's available, not what was actually done.
No, she was asked that how it was utilized for Mr. Allen, so I'm asking
Well,
her-
no, that's an appropriate question for a
Right.
treating healthcare provider, not for a corporate designee, because you forgot to ask these questions from numerous depositions before. I object. I'm going to try to answer the question, but this is not an appropriate topic for a corporate designee.
Okay. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you another question. Can you tell me and identify all of the systems, physiological systems, that were monitored by the alarm system that was hooked up to Mr. Allen in his room on March 18, 2013?
Objection.
I've tried
If
that.
you can try, but I mean, this isn't a question that should have been asked previously of the person who
Yep.
made this record
I've
or
heard
treated
that
the
3
patient.
times. I just need to know if she can answer the
It
question.
appears as if on this strip, the heart rate's on here. Heart rate, KC. Non-invasive blood pressure cuff is on here. SpO2 is on here. And it reads SpO2 100, which
Which is what?
if that's percentage of the O2 sat, that's as high as you can go.
Okay.
And then it says rate.
Would that be the heart rate you already testified about?
It could be. It says heart rate up here, 78, and this says 77.
Okay.
So, yes, that could be.
And from the policies and procedures that were provided, I want you to go to tab number 33. It
I don't have
is-
your set.
Okay, it is the monitor safety. It's policy COP009A. It says guidelines for developing a monitor safety plan in ICUS and IMCS. Okay, ma'am, can you go to the last page, which it says parameter default limits? There should be a chart. Okay. Make sure we're on the same, talking about the same page.
I'm not sure we are.
I'm going to show you what I'm looking at, sir, if you want to compare with what you have.
Okay, 0009A. So we produced this, but it looks like this didn't go into effect until, this went into effect in July of 2014. There's another policy called Monitor Safety Plan that we did produce. That was in effect as of July 2012.
Right. Right.
I mean, you can ask her about this, but I
I will,
don't think
'cause-
that policy was in place at the time, and I object to it because it's not
Well-
going to be admissible.
Well, this was produced, and I want you to take a look at the last page where it says parameter default limits. I want you to read that paragraph, it's there.
Over here? This?
Yes, ma'am.
Parameter limits.
So let me first object. It even says here these limits were revised February 19, 2015, which is almost 2 years after this patient's care. Go ahead. I object.
These limits were revised 2/19/2015 with RN manager Ruth Borkowski, SCN2 Kathy Zai, physician Brian Edwards, MD Brian Edwards, RN Joshua Steen, and Tina Cafeo, all present or notified and approving of any changes made.
Ma'am, the parameters that are depicted in that table, are those all of the physiological systems that are monitored by the monitor system that was hooked up to Mr. Allen in March of 2013? I just want to know if those were all the systems that are monitored.
Objection. This document's 2 years later, so you're asking were this parameters applicable 2 years earlier?
I'm not
I
asking,
object.
no, the question is, no. My question is this. Were the parameters that are listed in that table, not the specific references to the parameters, but the physiological symptoms, okay? We're not talking about the reference range, low or high, but there's systems that appear on the very left-hand side of that column. Yes, ma'am. Were those the same systems that were monitored by the cardiac monitor system that was hooked up to Mr. Allen when he was a patient at this hospital in March of 2013?
So I'm going to object. There's got to be 30 or more of these parameters. So you're asking her. I'm objecting to the extent that she's supposed to have this committed to memory. I'll let her answer.
I believe if the patient has these lines and they are connected to the monitor, this is saying they can be monitored.
Okay. All right. Now, does that chart also set the parameters for the alarm to go off, a low and high parameter for each of the systems that are being monitored?
Objection. Same basis. You can answer.
Are you asking these numbers that are sitting here right now?
Yes. Did the numbers in that chart reflect when this policy was prepared? Does that reflect the parameters, the high and low for the alarm systems for the systems that are monitored?
Objection. Same basis. You can answer.
These aren't set yet. Is that what you're asking?
Okay.
So
Let's, because I'm confused, because we're confused. Why don't you explain that table and what that table means?
Objection. Same basis.
Go ahead.
You may answer.
So I believe these are different things that could be monitored in a unit, and those that are monitored, I believe, would get a low and a high parameter setting.
Okay. Do you know if the low and high parameter setting that appears on that document that you're looking at were the same that were in place in March of 2013?
Objection. Same basis. You can answer.
I'm unaware of the exact if these are the same exact default limits as in 2013.
Well, but those exact defaults, low and high, do exist, correct? They did exist, not those exact ones, but there was a low and high set for each of the systems back in March of 2013, correct?
If you know, I object.
They set default parameters for certain things that they monitor in each different area.
Okay. Can you tell me whether you yourself checked to find out what those default parameters were for March of 2013, or did someone else make an inquiry for you so you could have that information today?
Objection. As to form, you can answer.
I did not check what they are. I can only look at what's available to me now. I did not look. I don't know what the policy or the parameters were. I would.
But don't guess. I can make a representation that an effort was made to produce documents that were responsive, but it appears there was no document that we could find.
No, I don't want you to testify, sir. No, I don't want you to testify.
There was no, no, that's not the way corporate designee deposition works. There was no, we produced all the
Speaking
documents.
objection. If you're going to speak, the lady's got to leave the room.
Well, we made an effort and we produced the documents that are responsive.
Ma'am, can you tell me what efforts you made to find...
She's already told you she didn't make
You got to
it.
let me answer the question first before you object. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Ma'am, can you tell me what efforts you made and what efforts were made by the hospital to find the parameters for the physiological symptoms that the monitor that was hooked up to Mr. Allen in March of 2013 were at that time?
So I object, same basis that I've said before. The duty of a corporate designee is to educate herself, to provide information. When there are 84 different categories that we're supposed to respond to, many of which were sustained, she can't possibly have done all these herself. There were some efforts made by other people in the corporation to identify these documents. We produced the documents that have been found, and she's here to testify about the document that's been found. You can ask her if she looked for every one of these documents, and I can tell you outright the answer is no, she didn't. But
You're still testifying for her, and you can't do that. Ma'am, can you please answer my question?
Did you look for any of these documents yourself?
No, it's not my question. Madam Court Reporter, please feed back my question for this witness.
Ma'am, can you tell me what effort you made and what efforts were made by the hospital to define the parameters for the physiological symptoms that the monitor was hooked up to Mr. Allen in March of 2013, or at the time?
And I object, same basis. You may answer.
So I see the alarm policy. And default parameters are listed on this form. For default parameters. So I have looked at the policy for unit-based monitoring. Which is called Monitoring Safety for ICUs and IMCs.
Anything else?
There's another document that we produced, policy COP-009C, last revision date 08/11, attachment C, alarm levels and parameters, which would seem to apply to this time period.
All right. And which policy did you just quote from, sir?
COP-009C.
Okay. Ma'am, are you holding a one piece of paper that says policy COP-009C?
Yes.
Okay. But are the high and low parameters for all of the systems that were being monitored, that could be monitored by the alarm that was hooked up to Mr. Allen March of 2013 listed on that piece of paper that you're holding?
This piece of paper talks about the alarm level. Whether it's crisis warning, advisory, or message.
Right, but this does not list the parameter default limits for those
No.
functions. Okay, and my question is, because the document, the policy that was provided was revised. In fact, you were part of that revision in February 19, 2015, and the page before it says it was also revised of July 2014. When these policies are revised, do you keep the old policies so you can figure out what the revisions are?
I am uncertain if we keep the old policies when we revise them.
You don't know whether they're destroyed or maintained by the hospital?
It's online, the whole system's online. The policies and procedures are online.
Right, but I want to know, in particular, this is the prime example. We have an incident that occurred in 2013. What I'm asking for are the policies and procedures that were in place for developing a monitor safety plan at that time, and that has been revised twice now. What I'm trying to figure out, is there any way to go back through the records to see what that policy actually was in March of 2013 before it was twice revised?
So I'm going to object. I will represent that every effort was made to comply with producing responsive documents, and you have everything that we found. But I'll let her answer to the extent that she knows, and to the extent that she physically searched for some of these or all of these documents. You can answer.
So most of the changes from year to year related to alarm parameters for these different units, I don't believe we keep the past, but we function by the present alarm parameters that we're setting. So again, the alarm defaults are an alert to a patient condition and may or may not be. There needs to be an interpretation actually looking at the patient.
Yeah, that's a little far from my question. You may have answered it. I'm going to just ask one more time. Is there any way to go back through the hospital records that you're aware of to find out what these parameter default limits were for the various alarms on the monitor that was in place for Mr. Allen's monitor in 2013? Is there any way to figure that out through the hospital records?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, if you can go back to that single piece of paper, that table that you were holding in your hand, which is policy COP 009C. And if you can just interpret those words on the left-hand side, where it says arrhythmia alarm levels.
Which words? The words along the top or
Yeah,
along the side?
Along the side in the column beginning with Astoli.
So these are different types of arrhythmias that the arrhythmia alarm levels would alarm for. So asystole, VFib, VTAC, VTAC, VTAC greater than 2, V-Brady, couplet, bigeminy, I guess accelerated ventricular, pause, trigeminy, R on T.
What's R on T mean?
It has to deal with An R wave hitting, it has to deal with it's hard for me to explain. It's physiological, related to the waves, R wave, T wave on the rhythm strip. I can't exactly explain it physiologically. I apologize for that.
Okay, that's all right. Is peaked T waves one of the arrhythmias that the alarm system was set up to detect?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. And how about prolonged waves?
Are you now talking about the intervals?
Right. A prolonged
For the-
wave? Mhm.
I don't believe those are on these alarm parameters. They read on the EKG rhythm strip. Is that what you're asking?
Okay, you just brought up a very good point. Is the rhythm strip, I'm trying to figure out, the rhythm strip, the rhythm that you see on the monitor, is the alarm system set up in order to monitor that heart rhythm, those electrical impulses, to identify these abnormal arrhythmias that are listed on this piece of paper?
It is, but I'm going to say every monitor requires interpretation of a human being as well. And I can explain that. So if I'm in the bed moving around and the alarm alarms for a certain arrhythmia, it could be artifact related to...
I understand. The alarm requires interpretation by a physician or nurse.
Correct.
I understand. I'm just talking about
Okay.
when the alarm goes off. It's theoretically for an irregular arrhythmia that's listed on this alarm levels and parameters, correct?
Correct.
So then it's up to the physician to interpret that.
Correct.
I understand.
Okay. The alarm just notifies you that someone should look.
Okay. All right. Now, I think I've asked you questions. Peak T waves are not captured by this alarm system, correct?
That's how I am interpreting this.
All right.
That's a visual.
Right. If a nurse turns off an audible alarm, are they supposed to document the chart?
Are they to, can I clarify?
Yes,
Are they to
ma'am.
document if they turn, or if they silence the alarm?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
Okay. All right. If an alarm continues for 5, 10, 15 minutes, is that supposed to be noted in the chart somewhere?
No.
Okay. If an alarm stops going off, is that supposed to be noted in the chart?
No.
Okay, so the only time you'll have a record is when the alarm initially sounds?
Objection is to form. You can answer.
You document if there's a specific patient condition that requires documentation. When an alarm goes off, someone should address why the alarm's going off. So you don't document the alarm, you document why the alarm's going off and what you're doing about whatever the patient condition is.
Okay. Ma'am, if you could go to page 495 in Exhibit 1, which I hand to you.
Okay. Thank
And can you tell me if that's what we're seeing here is a what type of information is captured on this? Is this from a 12-lead EKG, or it's from the information that was monitored by Mr. Allen's monitor at the time he was a patient at the hospital?
This looks like a 12-lead EKG.
Okay. And do you know how long they're kept at the hospital?
When you say those,
The printout, the information for the 12-lead EKG that's depicted at page 495, how long that's kept in the hospital
I
record?
believe these are,
objection. Go ahead.
part of the patient record.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So, for example, and getting back to the topic area that I'm talking about, if a patient's alarm for the heart monitor repeatedly alarms over a 3-hour period, what the nurse is required to do is document what she did in response to every time the alarm goes off. Is that correct?
No, they're to address if there's a condition on why the alarm's going off. So if the alarm's going off because of artifact, you're not continually documenting the alarm's going off by artifact. If the patient has a condition requiring intervention, that's what they're documenting.
Okay. So if an alarm goes off 4 or 5 times during a 3-hour period, and it's not from an artifact, it's for a real patient condition, then is the nurse required to document that in the patient's chart?
Objection.
They document what they're doing. They're not going to document each time an alarm goes off. They're going to document what they're doing about the patient condition
Okay.
as they're doing interventions.
All right. So for every time that an alarm goes off that is not from an artifact, okay, then they have to document what they did in response to that alarm, not that the alarm itself went off, but what they did in response to
Not
that?
every time an alarm goes off. The alarm could be going off, and I could silence it, and I could be treating the patient, and I would document what's happening. I'm treating the patient. The alarm can go off and I'm silent. I'm treating the patient. I will document what I'm doing to the patient. I'm not going to document every time an alarm goes off. I'm going to treat the patient, and I'm going to document why I was treating the patient, what occurred, and what intervention was taken.
All right. If a patient alarm goes off for irregular arrhythmia, and the nurse and the doctor addresses that, and the arrhythmia subsides, and then 15 minutes later, the alarm goes off again for an irregular arrhythmia, is that a situation where the nurse has to document that that actually occurred,
Objection.
that the patient developed another irregular arrhythmia?
I object. You may answer.
Again, depends on patient condition. So if a patient is going in and out of a certain arrhythmia and the treatment's being rendered, the patient's going in and out of the arrhythmia, you're not going to document every time they're going in and out. You may say the patient is intermittently going in and out of a certain rhythm, and then what you're doing about it, and you're continuing to monitor. So you're not, again, documenting every time the alarm goes off, or more specifically, it's patient specific if you're going to document related to what's going on with that particular patient with arrhythmias.
Are there any rules, policies, and procedures for the nurses to know what they're supposed to do when these circumstances occurred? When arrhythmias set off an alarm, then the arrhythmia is intermittent, the arrhythmia goes away, the arrhythmia comes back. Is there any written policies or procedures that indicates how a nurse is supposed to document those type of situations in the medical chart?
So The nurse will continue to document the patient condition and treatment plan individualized to that particular patient. And if the physician is ordering a treatment, that is documented as well.
Well, my question was, are there any written policies and procedures that nurses are required to follow with respect to the documentation of these types of situations? Particularly responding to alarms. The alarms are sounded by arrhythmias. The arrhythmias goes for 5 or 10 minutes, then the patient's normal for 15, 20, half hour, then the alarm goes off again. Is there any policies or procedures that give nurses guidelines or instructions as to how they're supposed to document that type of situation?
The nurses document patient conditions and changes in patient conditions, and through orientation and through orientation and education, they're taught appropriate documentation. As for if there's a policy, that guides them to document when there's a change in a patient condition, which I believe is what you're asking.
Yeah, it's particularly with respect to the cardiac alarms going off. That's a condition I'm talking about, which is a patient condition.
They're not required to document when alarm goes off. They document patient condition along the time they're caring for the patient and interventions as such. There's not a policy that says at what intervals and what you must document
All right. Now you said patient nurses.
when an alarm goes off.
All right. All right. You said nurses learn this through orientation and education.
Mm-hmm.
Is that orientation provided here at the hospital, and is that education provided here at the hospital?
Yes, and there's documentation standards for level of care.
And have you reviewed the records to see what those documentation standards are for the level of care, which would include the situation for Mr. Allen that occurred on March 18, 2013? Do they exist?
Objection beyond the scope. It was requested. But you can answer that question.
I have not reviewed the documentation standards for 2013.
Can you recall what they were?
Is that what you're asking?
A couple years ago. Do you remember?
In the intermediate care unit, I believe they're required to do every 4-hour vital signs and a review of system documentation.
If an alarm goes off for an arrhythmia that's not caused by an artifact, which means a real arrhythmia, is a nurse required to notify the attending physician?
The nurse will notify the attending physician for changes in patient condition, such as a rhythm change, yes.
And they're required to do that?
Yes, unless it's a continual treatment for that arrhythmia, meaning I'm already treating the patient going in and out of that arrhythmia. The physician may not want to be notified every time they're going in and out of it if they're in the middle of a treatment plan.
But that would be something the nurse and the doctor would have to talk about.
They would discuss.
Okay. All right. With respect to list of documents and other items to be produced, Counsel, did you say she was going to address paragraph number 11? I have 10, 11, 13, and 21. I'll be sure I have that.
I'm sorry, under what category?
Well, Roman numeral 3, number 11. I wrote down she was going to address 10, 11, 13, and 21.
No, I think that's under category 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
For Roman numeral 2. I think number 10 she's already addressed.
All right. I'll ask you about number 11 under category number 2. Did the hospitals, please state whether the hospital's criteria, policies, and/or protocols for ordering hemodialysis for inpatients in March 2013 differed in any way, shape, or form depending upon the day of the week which the hemodialysis is ordered for an inpatient.
Go ahead.
Okay. You still request a consult, and the nephrologist still writes the orders for dialysis. On Sunday, there's not in-house dialysis, so on-call is called in to render services.
All right. Is that same on-call service, does that apply to national holidays as well?
I'm sorry, I should know that. I do, yes, it does.
And how about during the week between Christmas and New Year's? Is dialysis service in-house closed down during that week or not?
No, they weren't.
Okay, no. All right. Right. Number 13, you were going to address whether there was any policies, procedures, or protocols, guidelines, or order sets that pertain to communications by and between attending physicians such as Dr. Burks and consulting physicians such as Drs. Jones, Diamantis, Santa, who are nephrologists. I'll let you know that's who they are, for the management of patients such as Dennis Allen.
So I think she's largely addressed that. But
She might have. I just want to see if she has any other testimony on that topic.
There's no policies and procedures. There's communication and orders written. Communication between the providers and orders written for dialysis as applicable to that patient.
All right. And is there any other topics under Roman numeral 2, Counselor, that this witness is going to address?
oh, no, there are not.
Okay.
So at least according to my records, we've produced someone now to address every one of the topics under Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, including the 3 depositions on Friday that were, to which our objections were overruled or to which we did not make objections.
I'll have to go back and check that myself. But with respect to the documents to be produced, ma'am, are there any other documents that pertain to the processing of an urgent or status request for hemodialysis?
So I object as to form because I don't think we've produced any, but you can ask her if she is aware of any.
I'll rephrase the question.
Right.
Ma'am, did the hospital conduct a search for all documents that pertain to the processing of an urgent or stat request for hemodialysis?
I will object. I'll permit her to answer.
There are no policies related to stat requests for hemodialysis.
Thank you. With respect to number 13, any and all documents, memos, research, studies by the nephrology department wherein drugs other than Kexlate were being considered for the treatment of hyperkalemia in the time period of 2011 through 2015. Did the hospital, to your knowledge, conduct a study to see if any of those documents exist?
So I was only made aware of a study by Dr. Weir that occurred fairly recently related to a treatment, I think, other than Kexlate.
Was that the 2000 study on, was it Patrimer?
2015.
2015 study, the article that we're
Right.
talking about? Okay. Other than that, any other items that are
Not that
responsive?
I'm aware of.
All right. Number 21, all documents and records to include electronically stored data which recorded the times Dennis Allen's heart monitored alarm on March 18, 2013 between 10:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock p.m. Ma'am, has the hospital conducted a study to determine if any of those documents exist?
Alarms are not, the alarms, are you talking about the alarm? So, I'm sorry.
Let me read the
Are-
question again. We're asking for all documents and records to include electronically stored data which recorded the times Dennis Allen's heart monitored alarmed on March 18, 2013 between 10:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock p.m. Number one, I want to know if there was a search that was conducted to see if that information existed and whether or not that information did exist.
The only information that are maintained is that's in the actual medical record.
So no other
This-
documents are in existence?
No,
Okay.
no.
All right. Oh. Ma'am, are you familiar with SpectraLink?
A type of phone?
I'm sorry?
A type of phone?
I saw the word SpectraLink that was referenced in your policy that says guidelines for developing a monitor safety plan in ICU and IMCS. And it's on the first page of that policy. It says Spectra...
Can you give me the number of the
Sure.
policy?
It's under small letter I, and I'll read it. It says, each unit will establish requirements for the volume setting of bedside monitor alarms. Requirements should take into consideration unit layout, number of central monitoring stations, competing unit noise, and presence of adjunct notification systems, in parentheses, SpectraLink phones, marquee displays. Can you explain what those two terms are for me?
Some units have we don't use the SpectraLink, whatever, phones anymore.
Okay.
But they're phones that charge nurses or other people may have to communicate with. The marquees, which again we have stopped using at this organization, are the hallway signs. that kind of run a tag of what's alarming, and we've gone to actual monitors that have EKGs in the halls.
Were the marquees in place in March of 2013, or were the video monitors in place at that time?
I am almost positive that in the medical IMC, more specifically, that they had the hallway monitors and not the marquees.
Okay. Other than the hallway monitors and the alarm on the monitor itself in the patient's room and the alarm at the nurse's station, did the nurses carry any type of other pager device or phone that would alert them when one of the patients they were caring for, when one of their monitors went off in the room?
No.
Okay. All right. Just a moment. When it says rhythm strip required, does that mean, or when it says rhythm strip is required for a new arrhythmia, does that mean that the rhythm strip has to be printed out and saved in the patient's chart?
Yeah, the strip that you showed me.
Okay. So if arrhythmia goes off and it's treated and addressed, and an hour later the arrhythmia goes off, then there should be a new rhythm strip for that second arrhythmia, correct?
Objection has been answered.
Not necessarily if it's the same arrhythmia. You would document what you're doing for that patient and what's the patient condition.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
I don't have any questions.
Ms.
You would
Marcy,
like to read and sign.
Okay.
Ms. Marcy, the deposition, we're going off the record at the time of 1:04 p.m.